Hey everybody, welcome back to Honored Madman, and today we're going to talk about the sword graves. So basically I'm just going to go over each of the monuments and their locations and the significance of them, as well as the circumstances that led to their existence. There's 14 of these things total, and they're scattered across the surface map. There's none underground as far as I know. The first one is located in Limgrave near the Ag Hill Lake North side of Grace. And it reads, Godric the Golden, humiliated, having tasted defeat by the blade of Mikola, now on his knees, begging for mercy. This is of course referencing the fact that Godric thought he could take Melania and was basically manhandled to the point where he had to beg for his life and kiss her boots. You can hear about this humiliating defeat of Godric's as well as others from Kenneth Haight, a first-hand witness to all of it who's more than willing to share it with you. The graves probably mostly consist of Godric's men who fell to Melania's clean-rot knights, as Godric's own knights appear to be more boasters as opposed to actual fighters. But next up on the list we've got one located in the Weeping Peninsula near Castle Morn. It reads, The Siege of Castle Morn. A lone hero fights for his vengeance only to fall at the hand of Lord Godfrey. This is of course referring to the famous hero of Castle Morn, who I believe was said to be one of Godfrey's last worthy enemies. He wouldn't fully run out until he got to the smoldering church in Caelid, but that's another story. Anyway, this lone hero was said to be the original wielder of the grafted greatsword blade. This lone hero himself is probably buried underneath the Moongrave behind Castle Morn and is guarded by Leonine Misbegotten. The Misbegotten uprising here at Castle Morn has nothing to do with the original owners of the castle and more to do with their line of stewards and castellans, namely a banished knight named Edgar, a guy who puts securing a goofy-ass looking sword over saving his own daughter. The lone hero in the description fighting for vengeance is likely also referring to the fact that most of his men or most of his line was killed by Godfrey and the Golden Armies. Again, pure speculation, but it seems the most likely of explanations. Next up, we've got one in Liurnia of the Lakes near the Bellum Church. It reads, The First Liurnian War. Radagon's glory burns as red as his hair. This is from back during the days of the conquest of the Erd Tree, when all these different factions and cultures were getting steamrolled by the Golden Armies. One by one, though, the giants fell, the dragons fell, the lesser domains like Stormvale and Weeping Peninsula were completely swallowed up, but one region held out, managing to completely repel the Golden Armies, but obviously not deter them. This, of course, was the sorcerers and the Academy of Rey Lucaria, also, who at the time were firmly under the control of the Carian royal family. So, similar to Morrowind during Tiber Septim's conquest and Elder Scrolls, this was one region that couldn't really be conquered with conventional warfare, and instead would require something a little more long-term, such as infiltration and destabilization. That monument was just a testament as to how inept Radagon was. I mean, he was only given one region to conquer, and he can't even do it. I like the little part about his glory burning as red as his hair. Oh, his glory burnt alright. Right to ashes. Just like his dream of being a superior Elden Lord to Godfrey. But that, of course, brings us to our next monument, near the Church of Vows, also in Liurnia. This sword grave is in memoriam to Radagon's second try. It reads, The Second Liurnian War. No victory for the Golden, nor for the Moon. No prize but atonement, the birth of a vow. So my takeaway from this was that after being defeated and pushed back the first time, Radagon came back again with an even bigger army and reached a stalemate this time, but refused to retreat. Instead, he pulled the classic George Martinian fall in love with your enemy on the battlefield move, which worked wonders for him because Rennala completely fell for it and married him. But not before he washed himself off from his sins at the Church of Vows. He partook in the Nox ritual, which itself had become a Liurnian tradition, used for repenting one's sins. And surely enough, Radagon himself dropped all of his territorial claims and just became co-ruler of Liurnia with Rennala. We all know how that ended, however. But either way, he at least put an end to the wars with the sorcerers, at least for the time being. Next up is another one I almost forgot, located also in Liurnia. This one is right by the Liurnia Highway north side of Grace, and it reads, This marks Melania's southward march. The blade of Mikola and her clean-wrought knights grant her wings never to be clipped. This references both Melania's wings, which were said to be seen when she raised her sword aloft. We see her actual wings in the second phase of her boss fight. And just like it was foretold in the item descriptions, they appear to be made of Aeonian butterflies. It also mentions her southward march, but where was she marching to? Judging by the monument's location on the Liurnian highway, and the previous Swordgrave description about Melania, we can assume that she was on her way to Stormville Castle to go whoop Godric's ass, and from there she presumably headed to Caelid to go deal with Radagon. But again, we know how that all turned out for her, don't we? Yeah, she turned the general insane, but she also had to be carried back to the Haligtree by one of her knights. And then just straight up slept. Didn't go look for her brother, just straight up slept until we show up. Then she wakes up, and first thing she wants to do is fight again. So of course we put her back to sleep and nothing is accomplished. Anyway, moving on. Now on to the last one found in Liurnia of the Lakes. This one is situated right in front of Carrion Manor, and it reads, "The resting place of the contemptible cuckoos lost in the siege of Carrion Manor." This one's interesting in that it appears to have been erected by its enemy. So when a civil war broke out between the Carrion nobles and the Academy, I made a whole video about it, you should check it out. But the Academy's military leadership decided it should send a troop of its cuckoo knights to go raze the Carrion Manor to the ground. They first sacked the fort in front of it, the King's Realm ruins, and proceeded to march on the manor, only to be obliterated by the magical countermeasures that had been put in place by the Carrions. Afterwards, I imagine the Carrions constructed this sword grave because I don't think they would have let any of the cuckoos close enough to make it. But now on to the red area known as Caelid. The first one of its sword graves is located right on the border with Limgrave near the smoldering church. It reads, "Lord Godfrey, at last at the end of his campaign, his golden armies unvanquished and unbowed, yet finds his grace lost, tattered and faded." So this is another pretty straightforward one in that it really only talks about how Godfrey had finished his conquest. I don't know who he'd vanquished here at the smoldering church, but whoever it was his last worthy enemy. After that, it was said that the light from Godfrey's eyes faded. Now, most thought that this was just because he didn't have any worthy foes, but it was actually because Marika robbed him of his grace and then banished him from the lands between, so that him and his tarnished would die and come back stronger at some point when she needed them. Our next one's also in Caelid, and it's located near the impassable Great Bridge site of grace. It's one of the smaller sword graves out of the bunch. It reads, "The Starscourge conflict, Radagon alone holds Celia secure, and stands tall to shatter the stars." This one touches on one of the more famous mysteries in Elden Ring, and that is, why exactly did Radagon hold back the stars? Well, my own personal guess is that, for whatever reason, the Greater Will was going to send down a couple meteors, or astels, down to go destroy Celia, like it had done to other Nox cities. And Radagon, having learned gravity magic from an alabaster lord at Celia, just so he can continue to ride his horse after growing to a massive size, wasn't about to let this go down in his backyard. Instead, he held back the very stars themselves. Again, that's all speculation, I can't prove that, but it seems most likely. I'm not sure where those Erdtree banners at Celia factor in, though. I just always assumed Radagon had them there because he was loyal to the Erdtree, and while he still considered himself a champion of the Erdtree, he wasn't about to let the Greater Will do whatever it wanted with a town that he liked. But anyway, moving on to our final Caelid sword grave. This one is located near the Caelid Highway north side of Grace, and it's pretty damn big. It's right near one of the traveling merchants, and it reads, "The Battle of Aeonia. Radagon and Melania locked in stalemate, then the scarlet rot blooms." So, another simple one. This is pretty much the exact fight we see in the cinematic trailer where Melania blooms after getting stabbed by Radagon. And I imagine at this battle, scores of their own troops fell to one another, and that's why there's so many swords at this particular grave monument, as it is one of the more famous battles in the lore of the game. It's mentioned by a ridiculous amount of NPCs when you think about it. Just how epic and brutal this battle supposedly was, and its aftermath. I mean, it turned Radagon into a mindless, wandering animal who just eats dead bodies. But now on to the Altus Plateau. This first one is located right near the Rampart Side Path, site of Grace. You can't really miss it. It's a huge sword grave near that spot where all the golden goats are sonic rolling around, and if you go a little too far north, Landsack spawns and comes crashing in, swinging a red lightning sword and all that. But its close proximity to a dragon spawn site makes sense, as it reads, "The routing of the ancient dragons. Godwyn the Golden fought to his last, earning the friendship of the dread Fortisax." Now this is of course referencing the war with the ancient dragons, which began when the big dragon Grandsax flew over Leyndell and decided to rain hell upon it. And that war ended at this very spot when Godwyn the Golden fought to his last man and became best friends with the dread dragon Fortisax. Their friendship would run so deep that when Godwyn was killed in spirit, Fortisax tried all the dragon magic he could think of to cure or kill his old friend, giving him a proper death. But in the end, all he got for his trouble was becoming the Lich Dragon, corrupted by Deathblight. Next up, we've got another one in the Altus Plateau near the Altus Highway Junction side of Grace. This one commemorates the first defense of Leyndell, reading, "The first defense of Leyndell. A sovereign alliance rots from within. Traces yet remain of a bloody conspiracy." Now, on first glance, you'd figure, oh, this definitely refers to the Knight of Black Knives, and it certainly does, but it goes a little deeper than that. So back to Rennala and Radagon. Now, their alliance, or their union, was said to be sovereign by just about everybody that describes it, especially Muriel, pastor of vows. And he says there's certain consequences for breaking a vow that sovereign. Their union also stood as an example or a symbol of the alliance between the golden armies of Leyndell and the sorcerers of Aeonia, at least at the time. Now everything was well and good until Marika recalled Radagon back to the capital and married him. This drove, or rather sent, Rennala into despair. She was down, but she wasn't out. Knowing that her daughter was also an Empyrean and could possibly succeed Marika, she introduced the lunar princess Ranni to the Dark Moon and gave her all the tools she needed to bring about the end of this Age of the Erd Tree. Now I'm pretty sure it wasn't all super simple, since apparently Ranni may have had to actually rope Marika in on this plot, possibly offering to eliminate Marika's other unwanted children in exchange for some form of assistance, be it either sourcing the assassins or intel on Farah Missoula and Malekith. There's definitely alternate explanations for those, and I honestly prefer some of the alternate explanations. Like, I'd rather look at it like Rykard sourced her the assassins and got her the intel, and that's why she rewarded him with the blasphemous claw. But again, all deep speculation here. Moving on to the next sword grave, which is located right near the outer wall battleground side of Grace, it reads, "The second defense of Leyndell. The fell omen stacks high the corpses of heroes, yet the Erd Tree remains unshaken." Just like D'Angelo. Sorry about that. Now this one is of course referring to Morgott the Fell Omen, or Morgott the Grace Given, who was given grace after he emerged from the sewers to defend his capital that was actually his birthright, despite being raised in the sewers and kept as a sort of horrific abomination. This was so bad that Morgott himself hated the fact he was an omen, and I mean, I would too if I was treated like shit just for having horns. I would hate him. I mean, the horns coming out of the eyes look extremely painful too. And out of the hands and out of the elbow, it just looks fucked up. But he really saw himself as this cursed excuse for a man who deserved to live in the sewers, and when he got the chance to prove himself as a hero, he jumped at it, even if it meant saving all the people that would have scorned him. So that's when he became Morgott the Fell Omen, the Veiled Monarch, and basically just started wrecking everybody. He even defeated Radagon in single combat based off of one picture, and I stand by it. He basically became the capital's first line of defense and killed anybody who dared enter its gates. He even went so far as to challenge all the Tarnished who recently started showing up back in the Lands Between, down by Stormvale Castle, and just slaughtering a bunch of innocent Tarnished there. He really likes killing. Now, it's saying the Erd Tree remaining unshaken is of course talking about how, despite rising up to the occasion and it being his actual birthright, the Erd Tree would not open up to him. It closed its doors to him. It never saw him as any kind of chosen one or lord material, it just saw him as a useful defender. and basically tossed him aside after he was through being useful. He was one of the first characters I wanted to do a video about, but I never got around to it. Anyway, moving on. The only sword grave on Mount Gelmir was located at the site of one of the Erd Tree's most brutal, bloody, and longest battles. You can find it right near the 9th campsite Site of Grace on Mount Gelmir, and it reads, "The assault on Volcano Manor, the squalid, the sick, and the blasphemous, a wretched unending war with no glory." This one basically talks about how the conflict with Volcano Manor became one of those horrors of war situations real quick. Now, I think this war was particularly brutal and bloody because of why it was waged. Rykard and Volcano Manor sought to oppose the Erd Tree and burn it to the ground. They wanted to kill and devour the very gods. They essentially wanted to destroy Leyndell's entire way of living. And since their enemy fought with such a desire for their destruction and almost fanatical hatred, this allowed the forces of Leyndell to abandon any traditional taboos such as not using fire and fight back with a burning passion and pride for their own existence in opposition to those who want to see them destroyed. It mentions the squalid, the sick, and the blasphemous. The blasphemous is obviously Rykard and his followers. The squalid and sick probably means the frenzied forces, or rather forces who became frenzied after going mad due to the horrors they witnessed on the mountain. This war is called unending because, at least by the beginning of the game, it's still going on. Rykard has yet to succeed in destroying the Erd Tree, and there's still a mass amount of Leyndell forces on his mountain, and those Leyndell soldiers have not destroyed Rykard yet. I mean, shit, Rykard probably has more people trying to kill him now than he ever has, and he's still alive. Well, sort of alive, I guess. It was also said that this war had no glory, and I think that really mainly just has to do with the fact that I suppose there's no glory in committing atrocities during war. Now, unrelated, I know, but whenever I think of like war brutality or whatever, I always think of this scene from the Pacific where the guy from Mr. Robot, Rami Malek, is like tossing bullet casings into the opened up cranium of this enemy soldier. Like the dude's head is like the top of it is blown completely off, like the end of Kill Bill 1 when Lucy Liu gets her lid split. And Mr. Robot is just tossing like cartridges into the dude's head. Pretty dark scene. Definitely really memorable. It stuck with me forever. And honestly, his character was probably the best in the whole damn show. But anyway, on to the last Mohican. So this sword grave is pretty important. It commemorates the victory that kicked off America and the Golden Order's win streak. It's located near the relatively out-of-the-way giant conquering hero's grave, and is perhaps the most epic and closest to the berserk homage out of all of these monuments. It's also got a troll chilling at it. But anyway, it reads, "The war against the giants. Champions battle, trolls betray, fire vanquished, the era of the Erd Tree begins." Alright, so let's see what this sandwich is made of. The war against the giants is of course referring to America's genocide on the fire giants that couldn't have been done without her champions and her consort Godfrey, along with his newfound allies, the knights and heroes of Zamor, natives of the mountain who had been oppressed by the fire giants for millennia. They were sort of like the giants' opposites, being sort of frail and lanky, whereas the giants were massive and bulky, and the Zamor warriors wielded ice, whereas the giants wielded fire. But even their combined strength wasn't enough to beat the giants until the trolls betrayed. The trolls were considered the lesser cousins of the giants, and were covered head to toe in white fur, that is unless they left their lands. And though these trolls played a vital role in securing victory for America and her forces, the ones that chose to follow the Golden Armies south into the lands between would help them wage war on the rest of the continent. Obviously, some of these trolls chose to stay behind because they kicked the giants off. Now they had the mountaintops all to themselves. Well, they did have to share them with these giant birds and giant dogs. And giant hands. But the ones that stuck close to the Flame of Ruin appear to have retained a little bit of their connection to the Fell God and can use fire magic. But when Marika's wars were over and she sent Godfrey away, along with his Tarnished, the Golden Order would begin rooting out any and all things that existed prior to the age of the Erd Tree, well, besides humans. And trolls were no exception and were now enslaved as beasts of burden for the most part, and they started to look really malnourished as they lost their fur. I can only assume the reason for this had something to do with them originally being betrayers of the giants and Marika not wanting to take a chance and get betrayed again. I mean, she clearly had no love for the giants, and I doubt she had much love for their lesser kin. But not all was bad. Some giants made it off to Caria and enjoyed privileged lives of knights, fighting side by side with their queen. And the last part of the engraving, about the flame being vanquished, is just talking about how Marika defeated the fell god, and since she couldn't kill it, she sealed it away in the last fire giant and cursed him with some kind of weird immortality so he would have to eternally watch over the flame. And thus began the Age of the Erd Tree. The age that's currently on its way out when we enter the picture. But I don't want to ramble too long about each of these monuments. Most of this stuff is pretty, surface level information. I just wanted to throw my own little theories and twists on it. But if you stuck through the whole thing, I hope you found this video informative, and feel free to comment if I got anything wrong or messed up on anything or just about anything in general. I'm probably going to make a video on Jujutsu Kaisen because I haven't had this much fun watching a shonen anime since I watched probably the Soul Society arc of Bleach when I was a kid. I mean, this is top tier. I mean, this is probably better than that, and I know that might be blasphemy to some Bleach fans, but I could ramble on about that for hours, but keep an eye out for a video about that because I definitely will have something coming. Anyway, without further ado, we will have our outro.